Okay, let's dive right into this explainer. Today, we are unpacking a seriously fascinating 13-page critique of an absolutely massive dark romance phenomenon. We're looking at a deep dive analysis of Rina Kent's book, God of Fury. This is a title that has literally taken the romance reading world by storm. But as we're going to see, one incredibly dedicated reader and reviewer has dissected the text to ask a pretty fundamental question. Does a book's overwhelming popularity actually reflect its structural quality?
So, consider this staggering number right here, 4.49. That is an incredibly high average Goodreads rating, especially for a book that tackles some really heavy, contentious themes. Just for some context, getting anything above a 4.2 on Goodreads usually signifies a beloved, almost universally praised novel within a genre. And that incredibly high rating, it represents nearly 74,000 reviews from dedicated fans who absolutely devoured this dark romance. I mean, this isn't some niche, under-the-radar book. It is a total juggernaut. It has a massive, highly vocal fan base that champions it as literally one of the best releases in recent years. But as our source very quickly establishes, they completely disagree with the masses. The reviewer sets up this totally impartial, deeply detailed dive into the mechanics of why this wildly popular book might actually be structurally broken. They are just getting on a soapbox to say they disliked it. They've brought 13 pages of detailed notes to systematically dismantle the writing, the pacing, and the character dynamics to show us exactly why they feel the text fails. Section 1. The Paradox of Character Design. To really understand this critique, we have to look at the two main protagonists whose chaotic relationship anchors this 500-plus page book. The reviewer points out that the author leans heavily on that classic grumpy sunshine trope. We've got Brandon, a stuffy, deeply traumatized British artist, matched up with Nico, a violent Russian mob heir who somehow brings golden retriever energy to the table. But according to the analysis, while the trope is obvious, the execution gets incredibly muddy. Nico is described as the sunshine character, right? But he's also explicitly stated to be a raging psychopath who casually uses extreme violence. Brandon, meanwhile, is just trapped in this endless loop of fighting off mental black ink and intense self-loathing. Section 2. Structural Flaws. A Missing Plot. So, looking at the pacing of the narrative, the analysis highlights a massive structural issue. The actual plot involving the antagonist, a woman named Grace, doesn't truly kick off until we are roughly 85% of the way through the book. That leaves the first 3 acts basically drowning in repetitive interiority. You get multiple manufactured breakups, reconciliations, and characters endlessly ruminating on their trauma rather than an external plot driving them forward. By the time the villain finally steps onto the stage to trigger the climax, the book is pretty much over. Section 3. Line-level writing, prose, and vocabulary. Getting into the nitty-gritty of the text, the notes reveal an extreme reliance on repetitive vocabulary. The sheer frequency of certain words is wild. For example, nausea, which the reviewer points out is the #1 most repeated word in Brandon's inner monologue. And the word psycho, it's shockingly used 26 times. It just makes the reading experience feel tedious. The source argues that rather than exploring these characters' feelings dynamically, the text kind of just hammers the reader with the exact same descriptors over and over again. And the reviewer found some of the descriptive metaphors completely baffling, arguing they land as clunky rather than romantic. Like mixing mint blood, clover citrus, and a quote, fucking conundrum into a single scent profile, it's a perfect example of what the critique feels is an attempt at profound romantic writing that ultimately just reads as totally confusing and awkward. Now, to be completely fair here, the analysis doesn't hate everything. The reviewer admits to liking a few humorous moments, specifically some clever smash cuts between character point of views, and they really appreciated the surprisingly supportive family dynamics when Brandon comes out. But they argue all of that is vastly outweighed by the bad. The poorly executed, contrived miscommunications used to drive conflict, plus the constant telling of emotions rather than actually showing them, pull the overall execution down significantly. Section 4. Toxic Tropes and Dubious Consent. Moving into the darker themes of the book, this alarming quote from Nico perfectly captures the reviewer's concern over dubious consent. In the text, when Brandon is drunk and explicitly says no, Nico essentially treats that rejection as a fun little hurdle to overcome rather than, a hard boundary. The source points out that because the author already knows they'll end up together, the narrative excuses this behavior, framing what looks a whole lot like harassment as inevitable, passionate romance. The critique also emphasizes how the book frames this toxic codependency as a magical romantic cure-all. You have Brandon, dealing with severe trauma and self-harm, yet the narrative suggests that simply being in the presence of the violent, volatile Nico is the ultimate solution. The notes heavily critique this, observing that it completely ignores the need for actual therapy in favor of this dangerous trope that a romantic partner can magically fix deep-seated mental health crises. While fans frequently highlight this specific line as peak poetic romance, it's widely shared and highlighted all over Kindles, the source unpacks how it subtly promotes living entirely through another person. It masks major red flags as devotion. Sure, it sounds beautiful on the surface, but when you apply it to a character who desperately needs professional help, it just reinforces a dynamic of total unhealthy possession rather than an actual balanced partnership. Section 5. Flawed representation and female hate. Next up, the analysis really scrutinizes the LGBTQ+ representation. Speaking directly from lived experience, the reviewer argues that the physical mechanics and internal shame elements are written implausibly and carelessly. For a character like Brandon, who is established as obsessively fastidious and type A, to blindly walk into intimate situations with absolutely zero physical preparation or research, it strikes the reviewer as absurd. On top of that, the internal dialogue surrounding his intimacy is full of oddly placed bottom shaming and a total lack of realistic communication between the partners. Furthermore, the notes highlight a pretty disturbing undercurrent of misogyny throughout the text. Think about it. The male characters in this universe are regularly forgiven for literal murder. Their physical violence is romanticized as being protective, and they literally refer to themselves as gods. On the flip side, the female characters are casually demeaned, called bimbos, or subjected to horrific, deadly violence. Like the antagonist, Grace, who is brutally bled out in a bathtub while the male characters just watch. Section 6. The Audiobook Popularity Theory. So, the big question, how does a book with such heavily critiqued pacing, repetitive writing, and questionable handling of themes become a runaway 5-star hit with almost 75,000 reviews? Well, the reviewer puts forward a really fascinating theory about the format of consumption. Step 1, the author relies on those repetitive, prayer-like inner monologues, nausea, nausea, nausea. Step 2, a highly talented cast performs these lines in a premium duet audiobook. And step 3, that repetition, which feels super tedious on the written page, actually transforms into a soothing, almost hypnotic listening experience when spoken aloud. Ultimately, the source concludes that the very flaws that ruin the book structurally might be the exact rhythm that makes it an addictive, comforting escape for its audience. The predictable, repetitive loops of trauma and affection, delivered directly into the listener's ear, create this insulating bubble. The prose acts less like literature and more like a trance. Which leaves us with this final, super provocative thought about modern reading. Are we evaluating the quality of the author's writing or the hypnotic power of the performance? As the way we consume books shifts increasingly toward audio, it really makes you wonder if the criteria for what makes a good book is fundamentally changing right before our eyes. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and I hope it left you with something fascinating to think about.